With the DCEU coming to an end, I thought it would be a great time to just go back and rank all 16 DCEU films from the worst to the best in my own personal opinion. So I will admit, I'm a much bigger fan of the DCEU than I feel like the average person is. A lot of people dog on this franchise more than anything I've ever seen. It's constantly getting hate, but personally, I've found a lot of enjoyment from a lot of the projects within it. Obviously, as a whole, it doesn't have the same consistency and quality as something like the MCU, but it certainly does have a lot of great individual projects and a lot of great performances. A lot of great directors have worked on it, so I honestly have enjoyed it a lot more than the average person. So let's just get through this, starting with the number 16 spot, which is going to be Justice League from 2017. I don't think anybody saw that as a surprise. This is most people's least favorite movie in this franchise. And a lot of people don't even count it as a movie anymore. Ever since the Snyder Cut released, most people just consider that the new version of it, which is how I see it for the most part. But this movie still exists as its own thing, so I decided I was included as its own thing as well. And there's just nothing redeemable about it, really. It sure has some entertainment value to it, just some very surface level entertainment. But the Snyder Cut does literally everything better, so why would I ever decide to watch this again over the Snyder Cut? You know what I mean? I'm kind of in a weird position with this compared to the average person because I actually saw this version of Justice League after having seen the Snyder Cut in 2021. So I'm not sure if that made my experience better or worse than it would have been otherwise, because on one hand, I didn't leave this movie with major disappointment because of having, a lot of excitement for it like everyone else did with Justice League back in 2017. I mean, I went into it literally knowing that everyone thinks it's a train wreck. I automatically was assuming it probably wasn't going to be that good. But also, I mean, I have already seen the Snyder Cut at this point, so going to see it, I was just like comparing it to the Snyder Cut the whole time, and yeah, obviously it doesn't live up to it whatsoever. It's a very rushed film. They forced it to be under 2 hours, which, I mean, if you see the Snyder Cut, of course, there's a lot more content to the story than what this version allows it to be. So forcing the entire story into under 2 hours just did not work at all. The whole plot feels rushed. The tone is everywhere. One of the most inconsistent tones I've ever seen. Way too much misplaced comedy, which is probably one of the worst offenders of misplaced comedy.
It's good to see you playing well with others again. Just like a bat. I dig it. Maybe temporary.
A lot of people believe it was because of how popular the MCU was growing at this point that I guess Warner Bros. Thought that we need to make the DCEU a little bit more like Marvel, maybe add some more quips and comedic moments, but it just doesn't work in this universe. I mean, Man of Steel and Batman v Superman didn't feel like that whatsoever. So when you just throw in a bunch of quips with Superman and Batman, it just comes across as so awful and cringe. And that's what a lot of this movie is, just awful and cringe. In number 15 spot, this is probably my most unpopular choice right here, and it's going to be Birds of Prey from 2020. Now, this movie I really was excited for because I love Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. I think she's fantastic in the role, and she is great in this film. She's definitely the best part of it. But I always felt like this movie would have been so much better if they just stuck to that. Made it a Harley Quinn movie, made it 100% focused on her, but instead they start to focus on the other Birds of Prey. And I don't feel like any of the other characters from this group really had any time to shine in any way, shape, or form. I didn't really care for any of them. I wasn't interested in any of them. The movie didn't really do that enough for me. So every moment that we had those other characters, especially any moment where it was just them on screen and we didn't have Harley Quinn involved, I just fell out of interest with it. I thought Ewan McGregor as Black Mask in here was okay. Definitely left much to be desired though. There were some moments of entertaining action sequences in here. Obviously its R rating helped to make it a little bit more violent than the average DCEU movie, but it never went far enough with it. I never really felt like it was as strong as it could have been, even though I saw so much potential in this film. So definitely not a bad movie by any means. I don't really think many of the DCEU movies are bad, but it definitely just wasn't one that I really enjoyed that much. In number 14 spot is going to be Suicide Squad from 2016. This movie, honestly, when I first saw it, I loved it. Like, I absolutely loved it, but I was also a 16-year-old. I didn't really care that much about the intricacies of movies writing and such. I just thought it was such an entertaining film, so I left the theater just applauding the movie, right? Time went on a little bit, I rewatched it later on, I think when I was like 18 or 19, and I started to see a lot of the flaws with it. And then of course today, yes, I do think it's one of the worst DCEU films, but I do think it's better than most people give it credit for. I don't think it's an absolute train wreck but it is pretty You know, I do think it's slightly better than Birds of Prey just because I do like the characters a lot more. I think, you know, Will Smith as Deadshot is great. Amanda Waller is fantastic in this, of course. She's definitely one of the best characters in the DCEU. And of course, you have Ricky Flag, Harley Quinn's in this as well. There's a lot of just great characters I just found myself to be more connected to. And then in the last third act of the film, I thought that's where everything really came together and you saw a really interesting camaraderie between these characters. It's not perfect though. Far from it, because there's definitely a lot of issues with how they were built up. I think the third act is where this movie really shines. Those first two acts, very messy, very all over the place. The way they introduced the characters, it felt too flashy all over the place. It was very clearly a movie that was studio mandated to the extreme, which led to the movie being kind of cut up and misplaced in a way that it probably shouldn't have been. And everyone's still been cheering on for a David Ayer cut in the future. Of course, David Ayer has said multiple times that he does have a cut of this movie that he really loves and he would love to release, and they just haven't allowed it to happen yet. I really hope he gets to one day, because I would love to see the better version of this, because there is a version of this movie that I think could be incredible. But the version that they had was just, you know, it just didn't really hit the landing. But I think what is there is genuinely not as bad as what people say. Also, the soundtrack is amazing. Some of the best music from this entire franchise. And Jared Leto's Joker in here is not nearly as bad as people say as well. I don't think he's great. Don't get me wrong, I don't think he's great, but he's not terrible. He's only in like 5 minutes of the movie. So people saying that his Joker is the reason they hate this movie never really made sense to me. He's not the main focus of it. He's just there for some of it, for Harley's character. That's really all he's there for. I don't think he's terrible. He's whatever, you know? In number 13 spot, I've got Black Adam from 2022. I honestly was never that excited for this movie. None of it really looked that interesting, but I was hoping for maybe some just decent action. And that's really all this movie provided. It's just some decent action. The story was uninteresting, not really that appealing to me. I didn't think the characters were that great other than Dr. Fate. Dr. Fate was awesome. Hawkman was cool as well. I thought he was actually quite interesting. There's some really cool visuals in this movie as well. It's actually one of the better looking recent DCEU films. But like I said, the plot goes into a million different directions and majority of it does not really work for me. I think Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Black Adam, it's good casting, but I just don't think he did enough with the role for me. Like, he never really made me that interested in this character. The entire time, he just felt too stoic, which I know was kind of the point, but it just didn't work for me. I did not leave this movie thinking, yes, I need to see more of Black Adam. I left this movie being excited for Henry Cavill's return as Superman because, of course, they showed him the after-credit scene, but that led to nothing. So, yeah. If my only excitement coming out of this movie was just the, you know, idea of Henry Cavill returning, then, you know, the movie didn't really do much of a good job, especially when this was supposed to be like the revitalization of the DCEU for some reason, even though it didn't really do that at all. So I never understood why this movie was hyped up so much. But like I said, it's decent enough. It's certainly not a terrible movie. It's certainly not bad. It's just not that great. In number 12 spot, I've got Wonder Woman 1984. And this is a movie that I genuinely think is a little bit underrated. I don't think it's good. Obviously, it's pretty low on the list, but I do think it doesn't deserve nearly as much of the hate that it gets. The biggest issues I have with it is it went a little bit too far into the like cheesiness of what these movies could be. And I know that's kind of the intention here because, you know, you go back to the OG Superman movies. I mean, that's kind of just how it was. Like, they were cheesier and campier. And you can tell this movie was trying to go in that direction with Wonder Woman. But it just doesn't fit the tone that much, especially coming after, you know, Wonder Woman from 2017. It just completely separate tones. I think bringing back Chris Pine's Trevor, or Steve Trevor, not Trevor. I always get his name mixed up because his last name's Trevor, which is also, you know, usually used as a first name, so it just confuses me. But with Steve Trevor, they should have not brought him back, to be honest, especially in the way that they did it. It was really weird. Like, they had him in another person's body. It just did not work for me at all. You should have just left that character, you know, gone. We didn't need to see him again. You could have brought in someone else to go along this journey with her in this movie. But the things I do really like about this movie, I really do like Maxwell in this, played by Pedro Pascal. I would go as far as to say he's actually a very underrated DCEU villain. He's not that bad at all. I love the 80s setting as well. I mean, I'm a big sucker for movies set in the 80s, so this one definitely hit a lot of the right notes for me when it comes to that. And I genuinely thought Cheetah was a decent villain as well. Not great, but she was decent. It's basically the way I can describe this movie. It's not great, but it's decent. Now, every movie from here on out on this list, I think, is at least a good movie. I think we're getting to the ones that I actually really enjoy, and I think do more positive than negative. So that might, surprise some people because we're only at the number 11 spot. But like I said, I think a lot of this franchise is a lot better than people give it credit for. So coming in number 11 spot, I've got Shazam! Fury of the Gods. So Shazam 2 was just like Black Adam, a movie I was really not that excited for, which I never understood why I wasn't that excited because I actually really enjoy the first Shazam. So going into Shazam 2, I was like, yeah, I'm just not looking forward to this. I don't know why. I guess like I got so used to that same type of, really comedic superhero movie and was like kind of expecting it to be the same thing. And it was in a lot of ways. There was a lot of comedy there. A lot of it didn't work, but some of it did. I thought some of it was genuinely funny. I think one of the worst things about this movie, though, is how inconsistent the character of Billy felt between the different versions of him when he's, older and when he's younger. When they switched to the Zachary Levi version, the personality just does not really fit the version that we have in this movie of the younger Billy, because he's going through this thing in this movie. He's not as, childish as he was in the first one. So to have Zachary Levi's version of Billy be so childish, but then when you go to the kid version, he's all of a sudden not childish, it didn't really make sense. I think they should have tried to, combine those performances a bit better and make it feel more interconnected, but it rather just felt complete opposites from one another. The villains were kind of boring as well, I will say, but what really worked for me was just the charm of all these characters, because of course all the other kids did not actually become superheroes until the very end of the first movie, so majority of that movie was just Billy as Shazam. But this one we get to see those characters throughout the entire thing, and they're really fun characters. They're really enjoyable to watch here, and I actually like some of the character growth that they give some of them. But one of the best things is what they do with Billy when he is in his kid form. I love his connection to the mother here. I believe her name was Rosa, and she was, the mother of this, adoption family here. And it really does bring his character full circle compared to the first one, because the first one was all about him trying to grow to, love being a part of this adopted family. And he doesn't fully grow to accepting the fact that his mother, his biological mother, abandoned him. But he actually eventually grows to accept that in this, because he realizes that he does have a wonderful mother here who will look after him and take care of him. So those moments were fantastic. I loved a lot of the mythology as well. They do a lot of mythology in this movie, and it's a thing that they didn't really focus on that much in the other Shazam film, but it was kind of there. But here it was just full force, and I loved that stuff. And the action was pretty decent. So yeah, this is a good movie. I don't think it's great, but it's good. In number 10 spot, I've got Blue Beetle. Now, Blue Beetle, I actually watched in Mexico, which was pretty interesting considering this movie was, of course, the first like major Mexican superhero that we had. And so to watch it in Mexico was pretty cool. I do think this movie is just a very classic hero story all throughout, which is a good thing in some senses because it's just a refreshing sort of a movie that doesn't really do anything too crazy. It's not, going into mythology like the Shazam movies. It's not, world-ending stakes. It's just a very simple story with just this one kid who gets these powers from this little like beetle thing. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. I do feel like the villains were kind of weak. Just maybe too generic for my taste. Of course, the movie itself all around is very generic, which, like I said, isn't entirely a bad or good thing. But the villain being generic, I think, did create more of a problem. And it wasn't the end of the world. I did think the family dynamic between, Blue Beetle's main family here was great. But that's really all I have to say about this movie. I don't think it does anything that fantastic. I don't think it does anything that bad. So it's just a good movie all around. In the number 9 spot, the most recent movie in the DCEU, the final movie in the DCEU, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. And I think this movie's good as well. I talked about that in my review. A lot of people thought I was crazy for saying it was good, but it's just how I feel. I think it's a good film. It's not amazing. It's not great. It's just good. It's fine. It's enjoyable. I had a good time watching it. I thought it had a lot of just really cool action sequences just because James Wan is really good at directing action sequences. And yes, there wasn't nearly as much in this one as he had in his first film, but it was still really cool. Really awesome visual effects, really amazing color palettes all throughout Atlantis. I really enjoyed the Arthur and Orm bromance here as well, just getting to see them bond, and they actually had a really nice moment towards the end of the movie, and the music was outstanding just like it was in the first one. Black Manta is as great as he was in the first one as well. It pretty much just followed up the first film very well. Like, it felt like a solid sequel altogether. Probably the most sequel feeling sequel I've ever seen in my entire life. Funny enough, it just, I don't know, it felt like it followed up that one so well. I just feel like some of it was a bit messy. You can tell it was reshot a lot. You can tell it was not, you know, exactly the way it was supposed to be originally. There was definitely some comedy misses as well, some moments where they threw in comedy where it just didn't really belong there, and it just ended up not being that funny. I think comedy causes a lot of issues in a lot of movies, especially in the comic book genre, so definitely chill out with the comedy, please. That was one of the worst things about this movie, actually. There were some moments that were genuinely funny as well, so I can't say all of it didn't work. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it's a solid Aquaman film. In number 8 spot, I've got Shazam from 2019. And Shazam is really good. I don't have really anything bad to say about this movie. It's one of those movies where it just doesn't really do anything bad. But I think it's kind of just the perfect, like, fun, family, you know, family-centric superhero movie out there. It's the perfect one to put on for your family. If you're, you know, you want to watch a movie with your family, you don't know what to pick, this movie is perfect. It has that found family sort of a theme to it, where of course Billy is, you know, adopted into this family and he doesn't really feel like he fits in all that well. He wants to, all he cares about is going to find his own mother. Eventually, you know, he learns that she did abandon him. So eventually he has to kind of learn to actually care about this family and be a part of them, which they further follow up in the sequel. But I think this one is just really damn good. And him actually getting those powers himself, becoming Shazam, was really cool. And it's a whole, like, you know, just seeing a kid dealing with his powers, just trying to mess around with it and just having fun with it. It's a good time. This is a really, really good movie. I really have nothing bad to say about it, to be completely honest. Like I said, it's just good. It's great. The villain, Mark Strong playing the villain was amazing. He plays a great villain, and he played the villain in Kick-Ass as well, but he's fantastic here. And like I said, the dynamic between Billy and all of, you know, the other siblings of this family is just fantastic. It's a great movie. It's very funny as well. It's got a lot of good comedy. Now, in the number 7 spot, this might be even more unpopular than my Birds of Prey placement, but this is going to be The Flash. And don't really understand the hate for this movie, to be honest, because I feel like all the hate I see for this movie boils down to 2 things. And I do agree with those 2 things that a lot of people critique this movie for. And that is the CGI in a lot of scenes and the cameos at the very end. I do think the CGI, some of it, I do not think all of it's bad. I think there's a lot of scenes where it looks completely fine. There's just a few scenes, you guys know the scenes I'm talking about, where you can tell they kind of cheaped out on it a little bit. They also mentioned that they were going for some sort of an effect where it was supposed to look a bit distorted in some scenes, but they probably just should have touched it up a little bit better to at least make it look cleaner. But that's not like a major problem. It maybe affects 3 minutes of the movie total. And then the cameos at the end, it just felt kind of weirdly placed. They're like these CGI cameos of characters that have been long gone. The actors and actresses who play them, a lot of them have, you know, passed since then. So it felt weird to include that. But again, that's like 1 minute of the movie. It's not going to immediately ruin the film for me. And I feel like those are the only real complaints I hear for this movie. Nobody ever talks about the story, the characters, the choreography, the action, literally anything else. Nobody ever talks about it. It's just, oh, I don't like the cameos. I don't like the CGI. That's it. Sure, if that's enough for you to hate a movie, go for it. But for me, it's not really, because it only affects, like I said, maybe 4 minutes of the movie. This movie's a lot of crowd-pleasing fun. There's really never a dull moment for me. I feel like it's very just fast-paced. I love the story as well. It's just Barry trying to save his mother as much as he can, and he learns in the end that he really has no way of doing it without completely altering the universe, or the multiverse, I guess. So he has to accept that in the end. And it ends kind of weirdly. I will say I don't love the ending either, but everything leading up to that was great. I love the inclusion of Michael Keaton's Batman here as well. I thought it was just great to see him again. And I don't feel like he was thrown in as some, like, oh, just nostalgia bait sort of. You could say it was nostalgia bait, but it does play as a genuine addition to that character. Whether it's the same exact version from the Tim Burton films or not, it's kind of irrelevant because it does feel like the same version. So I feel like in a way, it's at least a spiritual successor to that version. We also have Ben Affleck's Batman in here, and he's not in it nearly as much as I wish he was, but it's just great to see him again for the last time. So I loved that. The whole first act in general was really fantastic. Supergirl here is great as well. I thought she had a lot of great moments to shine. I thought the other version of Barry, although he was annoying in some scenes, I thought that was kind of the point, and some of his annoyingness was actually kind of funny to me, so I got a kick out of that. And the soundtrack is fucking amazing. It's one of my favorite soundtracks in the entire DCEU. In the number 6 spot, I've got Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Now, I've only seen the extended edition, so I've never seen what it looks like with, the theatrical cut. So I have no idea if that version's a lot worse. I've heard it's a lot worse. I think the version I watched was a pretty damn great film. So yeah, like I said, I can't really compare it to another versions, and I just haven't seen another version of it. I absolutely love the grittiness and just darkness of this movie. I know a lot of people judge it based on that because they feel like Superman and Batman, they shouldn't have movies like that, especially Superman. Like, Superman should be more hopeful, and I don't really care though, because like, yes, these aren't great adaptations of Superman and Batman. If you're trying to be accurate to the original intent of the characters, sure, like Batman kills in this movie. Obviously, that's not what Batman should be, but do I really care if I still really enjoy this version of it? It's its own separate thing, and that's okay. Same with the Superman in this. So I never really understood those complaints in terms of like judging the movie harshly based on that. I get wanting to see more comic accurate adaptations of those characters, but for what it is here, I think it's fantastic. The same thing goes for Lex Luthor. I really actually enjoy Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor here, but is it, in comic accurate adaptation? Not really. I think the pacing of the movie's great. I think the action's great, especially when you get to the actual Superman versus Batman stuff. Doomsday was maybe a little bit rushed, but I do really like the scenes with that, as well as Wonder Woman coming in, which, I mean, some people might call that kind of just thrown in there, but I don't know. I thought she had a pretty interesting part to play in this film. And then when you actually get Superman and Batman working together by the end, I actually think it flows rather well. A lot of people hate that whole Martha scene. I think it makes a lot more sense than people give it credit for. It's basically Bruce realizing that this man, he's not that different from humans. Like, he's not this, extraterrestrial who's, just wants nothing but to cause chaos on Earth. He genuinely is a person, even if he's technically an alien. And I think he needed to know that he had a mother for that to work. You know what I mean? The cinematography here is amongst some of the best I've seen in the entire DCEU. Zack Snyder has such a good, he's great with visuals. I think that's where he does best. And I think this movie just clearly shows that. And that Batman warehouse scene is probably one of the best scenes in the DCEU. It's just so damn intense. And just the punches Batman gives here. It's probably the best Batman action scene of all time. In number 5 spot, I've got James Gunn's The Suicide Squad from 2021. I was so pumped for this because, I love James Gunn's prior films in the Marvel with, Guardians of the Galaxy movies. So I really was expecting something great here, and given, Harley Quinn returning and all these other characters, not as many characters from the original Suicide Squad that I wanted to see come back, but there was definitely enough good replacements. I think, Bloodsport, Idris Elba was fantastic in that role. And of course you had, King Shark and Polka Dot Man, a lot of characters that I wasn't expecting to like that much, but they ended up being some of the best characters in the DCEU, way better than the Suicide Squad, the 2016 characters. Even though I did mention I like those characters, I think these characters are far superior. There's definitely just a lot better plot pacing, plot structure, the writing's stronger, the action's better. It pretty much just does everything the first one does, but better. It doesn't even feel like a sequel, really. It's kind of like its own thing, but it has some connections, obviously. Amanda Waller returning as well. But I really love how the plot plays out, especially with, Ricky Flag and John Cena's Peacemaker. He was one of the best characters in this movie, and that's, of course, one of the reasons they ended up bringing him into a TV series later on, which I'm not including the TV series in this ranking because it's not a movie. But I did really like Peacemaker. It was really good. But he was one of the best parts of this as well, along with, like I said, Idris Elba as Bloodsport. Such great stuff here. And actually, Ratcatcher was one of the best ones as well. The humor was amongst the best in the DCEU as well. So many laugh out loud moments. I mean, of course, I expected that from a James Gunn movie, but yes, it provides that. Some of it might be too grotesque for some people, but that's the kind of stuff I love, so I got a kick out of it. And I cannot wait to see what James Gunn's going to do with the DCU, because if this is the type of DC content he can provide, then I'm very confident in the future of the DC universe. In number 4 spot is going to be Man of Steel from 2013. And just like I was mentioning for Batman v Superman, I think, like, yeah, of course you can make the argument that this isn't like the best possible Superman adaptation when you're trying to be comic accurate, but I don't really care. It is still a great version of Superman nonetheless. The only things I don't like about this movie, I don't like the Papa Kent death scene. That's probably the only thing I don't like now that I'm thinking about it. That's just not a great death scene. The way it was shot was kind of awkward. Everything else is fantastic. Like, you can have one mistake with the movie while the rest of it's still amazing. Zod is a great villain here. I didn't mention him returning in The Flash. I don't think he was really a good or bad part of that movie, so there's really no point of talking about him, but he is great in this movie. He is one of the best villains in this universe, and he is just threatening. The stakes are incredibly high here as well, and the impact it has into Batman v Superman is really huge, of course. I love Amy Adams as Lois Lane as well. A lot of people don't really like her as as Lois Lane. I personally do. Just like Batman v Superman, the cinematography is incredible. The action is incredible. Yeah, there's a lot of destruction, but that's not really in Superman's control completely here. So it's kind of the reason why a lot of it happens. But I just love how the story plays out. I think the opening is one of the best scenes in the DCU as well. It was just a great start to this universe. I think it was the best way to start it. And again, the grittiness of it just is something that I think really works extremely well. And of course, don't forget the amazing soundtrack here by Hans Zimmer. He just killed it with the Superman theme. It's probably one of my favorite comic book soundtracks of all time. In number 3 spot, I've got to go with James Wan's Aquaman. I'm sorry. I mean, so many people dog on this movie. I don't get it. This movie is phenomenal. And some people say it's like, oh, it's all the visuals. It's all about the action. The story sucks. What's wrong with the story, bro? I don't see the problem with the story here. It's a very simple story. You get Arthur being introduced to this much larger world he didn't really fully know about, and then he eventually becomes Aquaman. It's very much an origin story in that sense, but I think it plays out extremely well. That first introduction to Atlantis is just amazing. You basically have 2 villains here, Orm, of course, as Ocean Master, and then Black Manta, and they're very separate villains. They have separate purposes here, but they do play a really good role, and I do like how different the motivations are. One is purely revenge, whereas one's, I don't want to say revenge, but it's more pity and an envy in a way, basically fighting over the throne for Atlantis, which is really entertaining. Just the way James Wan is able to shoot some of these action scenes is just insanely cool. It's one of the reasons I had some disappointments with Aquaman 2, because I feel like although they do have some good action moments in that movie, it's definitely not nearly as good as it was in the first one. The soundtrack's amazing as well, and like I said, I think the story flows very nicely. I see pretty much nothing wrong with this movie. Just straight up gonna be honest. I don't have a single bit of criticism. Even the comedy that was there worked for me, so yeah, this is a fantastic movie. In number 2 spot, I've got Wonder Woman. Now, Wonder Woman was actually the first DCEU movie I've ever seen. I actually saw it in theaters, and then all the other DCEU movies I didn't watch until way later. I actually reacted to a lot of them on this channel, so if you want to see those reactions, definitely go check them out. But Wonder Woman is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite comic book movies of all time, because it's just such a perfectly constructed story. You have, Wonder Woman leaving her home on Themyscira, and then she gets kind of thrown into the real world during World War I, and it's a very great fish out of water story for Diana, and I love her journey here with Chris Pine as Steve Trevor, who is definitely one of the best characters. And like I said, didn't like how they included him in Wonder Woman 1984, but here he is fantastic. And the way he kind of introduces her to the world, a lot of it's kind of comedic, and it's actually well-placed comedy. It's not forced in there. It feels organic, so it really works. And like I said, a lot of it has to do with the whole fish out of water aspect of Diana being introduced to a world that she's not really aware of. One of the best things about this movie is that they don't have Wonder Woman like completely outshine all of the World War I soldiers within this battle. That's something that I feel like is really hard to to manage, especially, other movies we've seen this happen as well, like Captain America, the First Avenger, where you have a superhero with all these other soldiers. And like, this is a real world event. You want to treat it with respect. You don't want to make it seem like all these soldiers are just worthless and you just have this new super soldier that's thrown in there and just does everything better than every other character, which obviously they're gonna be better because they're superheroes, but you don't want to make it seem like all the soldiers there are just worthless and useless, because that's not the case. And to show some of the great things they could achieve, even not being super, was important. And that's what this movie does. And I think it does that very, very well. I think the whole group that's involved here is a really entertaining group as well. And then you get into the final act, which a lot of people don't like the end villain here, the end battle sequence, the end fight. I personally like it. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's horrible. It's not the greatest thing they could have done with this movie, but I'm fine with it. I think everything that led up to it made sense and ended up being one of the best DCEU films. And in the number one spot is, of course, Zack Snyder's Justice League. And this should really come as no surprise. This is just the perfect movie for me. I really do enjoy pretty much every second of this. It's just in every way, shape, and form better than Justice League from 2017. I do think I enjoyed it more because I never have seen Justice League previously. I do think your enjoyment of this would probably not be as good if you have already seen the 2017 one, because I was able to go into it completely blind, completely like not knowing any of the stuff that happens, because obviously it's a different movie, but there are some plot elements that are similar. So at least getting that experience of not knowing any of it, I think helped a lot for me. It's 4 hours, it's a long movie, but every single second of that is really entertaining. All of it feels worth it. It expands so much more on the characters I wanted to see more of. Cyborg is a great example. You actually have actual plot development and character development for Cyborg, whereas in the original Justice League, he's literally not even like, he's there, but we don't know anything about him. So he's kind of just a worthless character from that perspective. But in this, he actually feels like an important part of the plot. And then, of course, you have even Barry Allen, the Flash. Like, he actually has a couple of good scenes there. Aquaman as well, even though he has his own movies, but still, yeah, actual more stuff to do in this as well. And they just took it more seriously. There wasn't all these annoying jokes thrown in. The tone was very consistent all throughout. It was one consistent vision. It looks incredible. Easily the best looking of the Zack Snyder DC films, other than maybe, I don't know, Watchmen. Maybe there's a argument you can have there about Watchmen, but in terms of DCEU, definitely this is the best looking one visually. It is outstanding what they were able to do with this. The CGI is fantastic as well. When you do have certain scenes with CGI, like with Steppenwolf, he looks great. I love the the teases of characters like Darkseid, even though they aren't major presences in the movie as far as actually getting to see him fight against the Justice League, but he's still there. And you still feel that presence and you're still scared of him because of that. The R-rated violence makes it a lot more entertaining as well. And of course, Tom Hulkenberg with his incredible soundtrack here just makes every scene that much better. So that is going to be my ranking for the DCEU. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section down below. Did you enjoy this universe or not? Because for me, I thought it was pretty good, but I think it was more so in terms of individual projects being really good, as opposed to the entire, completed thing really working as a consistent franchise. But when you view it just as separate movies that just happen to take place in the same universe, I think it's a lot better that way. And I'm totally fine with that. I don't need every single movie to connect and be, so important to each other. I think it's completely fine to have a universe where most of them are just their own things, and it works just fine. But I am excited to see what James Gunn is able to do with a universe that's probably going to be more connected and will likely be more consistent. So, of course, we'll be getting that next year, or I guess 2025, really. I think they're starting to do small things next year, maybe like, I think, one of the shows, but I believe all the movies are going to be starting in 2025. So, I will see you guys in the next one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Peace out.